The champagne flute trembled in Amara's hand as laughter erupted from the corner of the ballroom. She didn't need to look to know they were laughing at her, again. The sound cut through the symphony of clinking glasses and polite conversation like a blade through silk. "Did you see her dress?" The voice belonged to Vivian Harlow, Damon's former mistress, her tone dripping with manufactured sweetness. "Hermes, no doubt. Though I suppose when you're spending someone else's money, why not go for the most expensive?" Amara's fingers tightened around the crystal stem, but her expression remained serene as she turned toward the French doors leading to the terrace. The October air would be crisp against her skin, a welcome relief from the suffocating heat of scrutiny. The poor dear probably doesn't even know how to read a financial statement. This time it was Eleanor Blackwood, Damon's mother, her cultured voice carrying just far enough. "My son has always been too generous for his own good." The words should have stung. 6 months ago, they would have sent Amara fleeing to the powder room with tears threatening to spill. But tonight, something different coursed through her veins, something that tasted like steel and burned like whiskey. Through the crowd, she caught sight of Damon near the bar, his dark head bent toward a group of investors. He was magnificent in his tailored tuxedo, every inch the powerful CEO who commanded rooms and moved markets with a single decision. When he'd slipped that 20-carat diamond onto her finger 8 months ago, she'd believed she was the luckiest woman alive. Now she wondered if she'd been the most naive. A server approached with a silver tray, and Amara set down her barely touched champagne, her gaze never leaving her husband. Damon laughed at something one of the men said, the sound rich and familiar, and for a moment her chest tightened with the memory of when that laugh had been just for her. The music swelled, a haunting waltz that seemed to mock the fairy tale she'd once thought she was living. Around her, New York's elite continued their dance of power and pretense, unaware that the woman they'd dismissed as a gold-digging parasite had spent the last 3 months learning their secrets. And tonight, the real dance was about to begin. Amara Sterling, née Williams, had grown up in a cramped Brooklyn apartment where her mother counted pennies and her father worked double shifts at the docks. She'd clawed her way through community college and into a junior position at Blackwood Industries' marketing department, where her keen eye for detail and quiet determination had slowly earned her recognition. That was where she'd first seen Damon Blackwood. Not at some glittering social event or exclusive restaurant, but in a conference room at 7 in the morning, his shirt sleeves rolled up as he reviewed quarterly reports. While other women in the office whispered about his devastating good looks and billionaire status, Amara had been struck by something else entirely. The way his brow furrowed when he concentrated, the gentle way he spoke to the cleaning staff, the fact that he remembered his assistant's daughter's birthday. Their courtship had been a whirlwind that left her breathless. Private dinners where he hung on her every word, weekend getaways where he showed her a world she'd only glimpsed in magazines, quiet moments where he'd trace her face and tell her she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. When he proposed on the roof of the Plaza Hotel with the city sparkling below them, she'd said yes before he'd even finished asking. But fairy tales, Amara had learned, were rarely what they seemed from the outside. Vivian Harlow had been Damon's on-and-off companion for 3 years before Amara entered the picture. Tall, blonde, and razor-sharp, Vivian moved through society with the confidence of someone born to wealth. She owned a chain of high-end galleries and had the kind of connections that could make or break careers. She'd never quite accepted that Damon had chosen a nobody over her, and she made her displeasure known through 1,000 small cruelties disguised as concern. Eleanor Blackwood was cut from similar cloth, old money, older prejudices. She'd built her son's empire alongside her late husband, and she viewed Amara as a threat to everything they'd worked for. Eleanor's smiles were ice-cold, her compliments had razor edges, and her advice always seemed designed to remind Amara of her place. But it was Marcus Chun, Damon's best friend and CFO, who'd become Amara's unexpected ally. He'd seen the way she'd light up when discussing marketing strategies, had noticed her quick grasp of financial concepts. It was Marcus who'd encouraged her to audit some business courses, who'd slipped her books on corporate law and investment banking. "You're sharper than they give you credit for," he'd told her one evening when she'd found him working late. "Don't let them convince you otherwise." The advice had planted a seed that was now blooming into something dangerous. The moment everything changed came on a rainy Thursday in September. Amara had been looking for her phone charger in Damon's study when she'd accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. As she gathered them up, one letterhead caught her eye. Meridian Holdings, Confidential Financial Review. She shouldn't have looked. Should have simply res-tacked the papers and continued her search. But something about the company name nagged at her. She'd heard it before, whispered in conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. The document was dense with financial jargon, but months of late-night studying had taught her to decode the language of corporate transactions. What she found made her blood run cold. Meridian Holdings was a shell company, and according to the forensic accounting report, someone had been using it to siphon money from Blackwood Industries for over 2 years. The amounts were staggering, millions upon millions that should have gone to shareholders, to employees, to the various charitable foundations the company supported. Her hands shook as she photographed every page with her phone. She was still processing what she discovered when she heard voices in the hallway. Damon's and another she recognized with a start. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review," Vivian was saying. "I've made sure all the Meridian transactions are properly buried in the subsidiary reports." "Good," came Eleanor's crisp reply. "The less my son knows about our little arrangement, the better. He's always been too soft-hearted for this kind of necessary business." Amara's phone nearly slipped from her trembling fingers. The 2 women who'd made her life miserable, who'd called her a parasite and a gold digger, were embezzling from the company. From Damon's company. She managed to slip out through the terrace door before they entered the study, but the damage was done. The naive girl who'd married for love had just gotten her first real education in the kind of power that money could buy, and the kind of person she'd have to become to wield it. The next few weeks were a masterclass in deception. Amara smiled at charity luncheons while secretly photographing financial documents. She played the dutiful wife at board meetings while memorizing names and faces, building a mental map of everyone in Eleanor and Vivian's orbit. The hardest part was Damon. Every night, he'd come home tired from work, and she'd want to tell him everything. But something held her back. Maybe it was the way his face would cloud when she mentioned any concerns about his mother, or how he'd deflect whenever she asked about Vivian's continued involvement in company affairs. "You worry too much, darling," he'd say, pressing kisses to her temple. "Mother knows what she's doing. And Vivian, well, she's harmless now. Just focused on her art galleries." Harmless. The word tasted bitter in Amara's mouth as she uncovered more evidence. Meridian Holdings was just the tip of the iceberg. There were fake consulting fees, inflated vendor contracts, mysterious advisory payments, that all led back to accounts controlled by Eleanor and Vivian. Marcus became an unwitting accomplice when Amara started asking him seemingly innocent questions about corporate structure and fiduciary responsibility. He was happy to explain complex financial concepts to someone who showed genuine interest, never suspecting that his impromptu lessons were helping her build a case. "You know," he said one evening as they worked late on a marketing presentation, "you could easily get an MBA if you wanted. You have the mind for it." Amara looked up from the financial projections she'd been reviewing. Projections that, she now knew, had been artificially inflated to hide the missing millions. "Maybe I will," she said quietly. The social attacks intensified as autumn progressed. Vivian made sure photographers caught Amara's every fashion choice, then had her society columnists write snide pieces about new money trying too hard. Eleanor hosted ladies' luncheons where Amara was invited only to be subtly humiliated. Seated at the wrong table, given the wrong dress code, introduced with backhanded compliments that left her feeling small. But something had shifted inside Amara. Each cruel comment was now fuel for the fire building in her chest. Every condescending smile was another piece of evidence that these women had underestimated her completely. Late at night, when Damon slept beside her, Amara would lie awake planning. She opened her own bank account, began making carefully chosen investments using information she'd overheard at dinner parties. She cultivated relationships with journalists, lawyers, and accountants, all under the guise of wanting to be more involved in charity work. The parasite was learning to bite back. The revelation came in November, at Eleanor's birthday party. Amara had been relegated to helping coordinate with the caterers, a task designed to keep her busy and out of important conversations. But it also gave her access to areas of the Blackwood mansion she'd never seen before. In Eleanor's private office, behind a first edition of The Great Gatsby, she found the real books. Not the sanitized versions presented to the board, but the actual records of where every stolen dollar had gone. Vivian's gallery acquisitions weren't legitimate purchases. They were money laundering operations. Eleanor's charitable foundation was mostly charitable to Eleanor herself. But it was the final folder that made Amara's heart stop. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of her from before she'd married Damon. Her apartment building, her mother's house, her college transcripts. There were background check reports, private investigator summaries, even psychological profiles. And at the bottom, a handwritten note in Eleanor's precise script. The girl is exactly what we need. Poor enough to be grateful, naive enough to be controlled. When the embezzlement inevitably comes to light, she'll make the perfect fall guy. Who would believe the gold-digging wife isn't guilty? Amara sank into Eleanor's leather chair, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. They hadn't just tolerated her marriage to Damon, they'd orchestrated it. Every cruel comment, every social snub, every moment she'd felt small and out of place had been calculated to keep her exactly where they wanted her. Isolated, insecure, and completely unprepared for the frame job they'd been planning from the beginning. The scared girl from Brooklyn might have broken down. But the woman Amara had become in these months of careful observation and quiet learning? She felt something else entirely. She felt rage. Pure, crystalline, and utterly focused. By the time she rejoined the party, she'd photographed everything. But more importantly, she'd made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't just going to expose Eleanor and Vivian. She was going to destroy them. December brought the first real test of Amara's resolve. Vivian had been growing suspicious of her questions and her increased presence at company events. She began spreading rumors that Amara was having an affair with Marcus, pointing to their frequent late-night work sessions as evidence. The whispers reached Damon on a frozen Tuesday morning. Amara knew the moment he walked into their bedroom, his face a mask of hurt and confusion she'd never seen before. "Is there something you want to tell me?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Amara's heart shattered. This was her chance. She could tell him everything, show him the evidence she'd gathered, explain why she'd been secretive. But Eleanor's words echoed in her mind. Who would believe the gold-digging wife isn't guilty? Even if Damon believed her about the embezzlement, would he believe she wasn't involved? Would he trust that his mother and his ex-mistress had manipulated them both from the beginning? Or would he assume she'd discovered their scheme and decided to blackmail them herself? "There's nothing to tell," she whispered, the lie burning her throat. But Damon had built an empire on reading people, and he could see through her as easily as glass. "Then why do I feel like I don't know you anymore?" The question hung between them like a blade. Because the truth was, he didn't know her anymore. The woman he'd married had been innocent and trusting. The woman she'd become was calculating and dangerous. She'd learned their game too well to go back to being naive. That night, Damon slept in the guest room. The next morning, Amara woke to find divorce papers on the kitchen counter and her husband gone. The accompanying note was brief. "I thought we had something real. I was wrong about a lot of things." Vivian and Eleanor didn't even bother to hide their satisfaction. At the company Christmas party, they held court like queens, accepting condolences on Damon's unfortunate marriage and making pointed comments about gold diggers finally showing their true colors. Amara stood alone by the windows, watching the snow fall on the city below. She'd lost the only real love she'd ever known, and she'd lost it because she'd been trying to save him from the people who were supposed to care about him most. But as she watched the snow cover the streets in pristine white, Amara realized something. Sometimes you had to burn everything down to build something better. And she'd become very good at playing with fire. The turning point came in January, when Amara discovered that Eleanor and Vivian had accelerated their timeline. With Damon focused on the divorce proceedings, they'd grown careless. The forensic accounting report she found in Vivian's discarded purse at a gallery opening confirmed her worst fears. They were planning to trigger a discovery of the embezzlement within weeks, with all evidence pointing to the estranged wife who'd had access to company files and a clear motive for theft. But they'd underestimated the woman they'd created. Amara had spent months building her own network. The journalist who'd seemed charmed by her insights into charity fraud. The SEC investigator who'd found her questions about corporate governance so astute. The forensic accountant who'd been impressed by her understanding of complex financial structures. She'd also learned from Eleanor's own playbook. If you wanted to destroy someone, you didn't attack them directly. You let them destroy themselves. On a cold February morning, Amara walked into Marcus's office with a proposal. "I need you to arrange a board meeting," she said, setting down a thick folder. "I have something the directors need to see." Marcus looked skeptical until he opened the folder. His face went pale as he flipped through photographs of documents, bank statements, and recorded conversations. "My God, Amara, where did you get all this?" "Does it matter?" she asked. What matters is that Damon is about to be framed for crimes his mother and ex-mistress committed. Unless we stop them first. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. I'll call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. That night, Amara sat in her empty apartment. She'd moved out of the penthouse during the separation, and wrote a letter. Not to the board, not to the authorities, but to Damon. She told him everything. About the discovery in his study, about the months of investigation, about Eleanor and Vivian's plan to frame her for their crimes. She explained why she'd kept it secret, why she'd let him believe she was having an affair rather than risk him thinking she was involved. And she told him she loved him enough to let him go, even if it meant destroying herself to save him. She sealed the letter but didn't send it. Not yet. First, she had a war to win. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday that dawned gray and bitter cold. Amara arrived early, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. She'd spent the morning in careful preparation. Hair pulled back in a severe chignon, wearing the black Chanel suit she'd bought for her wedding rehearsal. She looked every inch the powerful woman she'd become. Eleanor and Vivian arrived together, their confidence evident in every step. They clearly expected this to be the meeting where Amara's crimes would be exposed, where the naive girl from Brooklyn would finally get what they believed she deserved. Instead, they walked into an ambush that had been months in the making. Amara rose when the board was seated, a remote control steady in her manicured hand. Before we discuss the quarterly reports, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the boardroom, I believe you should see this. The first slide was a photograph of the Meridian Holdings documents. The second was a recording of Eleanor and Vivian's conversation about burying transactions. The third was a timeline showing exactly how much money had been stolen and when. Over the past 18 months, Amara continued, her voice never wavering, approximately $47 million has been embezzled from Blackwood Industries through a series of shell companies and fraudulent transactions. The perpetrators are sitting at this table. Eleanor shot to her feet. This is preposterous. How dare you? How dare I what? Amara's smile was razor-sharp. Expose your crimes? Document your conspiracy? Or marry your son? She clicked to the next slide. Copies of the photographs and background checks Eleanor had compiled on her. You see, Mrs. Blackwood, I know exactly why you chose me. Poor enough to be grateful, naive enough to be controlled, and perfect for a frame job when your embezzlement came to light. The room was dead silent as she continued, methodically destroying both women with their own evidence. Bank records showing the flow of stolen money. Recorded conversations where they discussed their plans. Even security footage from Vivian's galleries showing the money laundering operations. The irony, Amara said as she reached her final slide, is that you taught me everything I needed to know to destroy you. You showed me how power really works in your world. You just forgot that students sometimes surpass their teachers. Vivian tried to salvage the situation. She's obviously been planning this for months. How do we know she wasn't involved from the beginning? Marcus Chin rose from his seat, a folder in his hand. Because, he said quietly, Mrs. Blackwood approached me 6 months ago with concerns about irregularities she'd noticed. I've been quietly investigating with the SEC's Forensic Accounting Division ever since. It was a lie. Marcus had only learned the truth the day before. But it was a lie that would save Amara from any suspicion of involvement. The authorities were called. By noon, both Eleanor and Vivian were in custody, their assets frozen pending investigation. By evening, the story was breaking across every major news outlet. But Amara barely noticed the media frenzy. She was sitting in her car outside Damon's office building, the letter she'd written burning in her purse like a live coal. When he finally emerged at nearly midnight, looking haggard and devastated, she rolled down her window. I'm sorry, she said simply. He stared at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. For which part? Keeping secrets, or destroying my family? For letting you think I was someone I'm not, she whispered. And for becoming someone you might not be able to love. Damon was quiet for so long she thought he might walk away. Then he opened her car door and slid into the passenger seat. I read Marcus's report, he said finally. All of it. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. And I realized that while I was falling in love with a sweet girl from Brooklyn, she was becoming a woman powerful enough to save us both. He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. The question is, do you still want to be saved? Or have you outgrown the need for a husband? 1 year later, Amara stood in the same ballroom where this story had begun, but everything had changed. The woman who'd once trembled at cruel laughter now commanded the room's attention, her every word carrying the weight of someone who'd built an empire from the ashes of betrayal. Blackwood Industries had been restructured, with Amara serving as CEO and Damon as chairman. The Parasite had indeed inherited the empire, but she'd earned every penny through brilliance, ruthlessness, and an understanding of power that her enemies had taught her too well. Eleanor and Vivian were serving federal prison sentences, their reputations destroyed as thoroughly as they'd once tried to destroy others. The $47 million they'd stolen had been recovered and reinvested in employee programs and genuine charitable work. The divorce papers had been quietly shredded 6 months ago, replaced by a renewed marriage built on different foundations. They'd learned to love each other as equals. Two people who'd both been naive about power and had emerged stronger and more dangerous for the experience. "Do you ever regret it?" Damon asked as they swayed to the same haunting waltz that had played that October night. "Becoming who you had to become?" Amara considered the question as she looked around the room. These people no longer whispered about her behind their fans. They courted her favor, sought her approval, feared her displeasure. She'd become everything they'd once mocked: wealthy, powerful, untouchable. "I regret that it was necessary," she said finally. "But I don't regret who I became." Damon spun her in a slow circle, and for a moment she was just a woman dancing with the man she loved. But when the music ended and they separated, she was Amara Sterling Blackwood again, the woman who'd turned the tables so completely that Parasite had become Predator. As they left the ballroom that night, a young reporter called out a question. "Mrs. Blackwood, what advice would you give to other women who find themselves underestimated?" Amara paused, her hand in Damon's, and smiled. It was a different smile than the one she'd worn as a naive bride, sharper, more knowing, and infinitely more dangerous. "Learn everything they're willing to teach you," she said. "And remember that the best revenge isn't just living well, it's owning everything." The cameras flashed, capturing the moment when the world's newest power couple walked into the night, their empire secure and their enemies vanquished. The Parasite had become the apex predator, and she wore her victory like the crown she'd always deserved. In the end, they'd been right about one thing. Amara had fed off the Blackwood fortune. She'd just forgotten to mention that she'd grown strong enough to digest it whole. What would you have done in their place? Tell us your favorite love story in the comments. Hit the like button if you believe in love and the power of perfect revenge.